And I think the last thing I'm going to talk about really is that we watched all the Deadpool movies together because Kat really wanted to go see Deadpool and Wolverine, and I hadn't seen any of them. So we decided to, with a friend, just sit down and watch the first two and then go and see Deadpool and Wolverine like a day or two later. So when I hear about most people talk about the first movie, at least, they talk about the novelty of it. They talk about how when it came out, and I remember what the discussion around it when it came out, how everyone liked it so much and it was so different. And I don't have that because I'm watching it for the first time now. But so does it hold up without that kind of novelty factor? I think so. I'll be blunt and say that not all of the humor in the film really appeals to me. I don't really like. There's something very awkward about the way that Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool swears so much. It feels very excessive. It kind of reminds me of like. This is funny. It kind of reminds me of like a 13-year-old who just discovered like now he can stay up to 9 and he can watch Family Guy, and now he's saying all the swear words at school. Which is funny because there's a kid in the second movie, the kid character, and I feel like that's what he was. He was just this kind of like edgelord, moody kid, and it felt like intentional with him. Like they made him swear a bunch and be like kind of lame and cringy. He acts like an American Jotaro Kujo. Like he's trying so hard to be cool and like brooding, but he's like a funny little 14-year-old that you can't take seriously. And that to me seemed like almost part of the charm of that character. But also like Deadpool kind of just does that. You might say excessive swearing. I could call it that. That stuff doesn't always work for me in those movies. I can kind of talk about the first two sort of as a blanket just because they're very similar. Like if you like the first one, you will also like the second one, you know. One of the things that it really made me think about was the difference between plot and story, and it kind of made me appreciate it a little bit. So if I had to describe this, I would say that plot, when I refer to the plot of something, the plot is the things that happen. The plot is the things that happen, the literal actions that the characters make on screen or on the page. The plot is the main character starts off here. Then he has a conversation with this person who tells him this, and so he goes here. And then he finds out this. So he goes to a different place and he talks to this person and they do this together. That's like the plot, right? The story is I would say is more of like the internal change of the characters. How the emotions and that kind of like the human element, you could call it, the part that's difficult to encapsulate in just a bullet point list. It would be things like the main character starts off believing this, and then he finds out this, and it completely changes what he knows, so he goes over here, and he talks to someone else, and they gave him this different perspective and new information. And from there, he sets out on a quest where he meets this person, and then they do this. I tried to kind of make it mirror the first example I gave. Right, and then by the end of the story, he's gone from one place, and now he's at another place, and he's a different person, right? That's what I would consider the story. So when you'll sometimes hear things as called plot driven, that's because they mainly concern themselves with the action that is happening on screen. There isn't that much character development or change happening, or reveals about characters going on. It's not the primary focus of the piece, right? It's more so the action. And then compare that to something like a more of like a character drama. And that is, I would say, probably very story driven, or some people call those character driven usually. But that's I would consider those to be kind of similar, right? It's all about the way that the characters are changing. And films will fall all across the spectrum of that, right? So There's a scene in Deadpool 1 where it's when he's part of the Weapons Plus program. I don't know if they ever call it that, but that's what it's called in the comics. And it's basically the people who torture him until his mutant powers activate. You know, pretty grisly scenes of torture and all that. And the main kind of leader guy who's overseeing it, Ajax, eventually they put Wade into the horrifying suffocation tube, where he is. They basically deplete the oxygen until he feels like he's going to die, and then once his oxygen levels get too low, they slowly fill it up until until it stabilizes, and then they drain the oxygen again, and they keep him like that for like days on end. Horrifying stuff. And that's what that triggers his mutation to awaken. And as once that's done, Ajax comes in and he says something like, now your cells can regenerate from anything. And in my head I was like, how does he know that? Like, literally, how would he know that? Like, a lot of the mutants, right, they have physical mutations that are very obvious. Like, there's a guy with spikes coming out of his back and shit. Like, okay, you can probably tell that, right? You could probably figure that out, at the very least. But what if your mutant ability is that you can fly, but only when you're in a good mood? I think that continuously torturing someone, you would never be able to figure that out. Right? It's a little bit self-defeating. So how do they actually? I'm sure in the comics this worked out differently, and there was some other way that they found out what it was. But Ajax just kind of walks in, and the information has been planted in his head by the universe. He just kind of knows that Wade can now regenerate from anything. And on one hand, I'm like, would maybe a more crafty, clever writer come up with some kind of other way that they would figure that out? Maybe. But for the purposes of what the story is actually about, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, Deadpool, I would say the first movie, is a story about Wade Wilson, who is a sort of, he's like an anti-heroic character. He does like violent things, but he'll do them for like understandable purposes. You know, he'll kill bad people or he'll intimidate them. I'm sure he also does bad shit, but you don't really see it on camera. He is he's a morally gray character, and the number one thing that he's going through is that he basically, I would say that the development with Wade's character is that he has no attachments to people. The closest is maybe like to his friend Weasel, played by the horrible person in real life, TJ Miller. Did you know that TJ Miller was on a train super drunk and started hitting on a woman, and when she didn't reciprocate his advances, he called a bomb threat on her and went to jail because of it? He did, not her, him, because of calling in a false bomb threat and also being intoxicated in public. Man, that is so funny, right? That is so funny that, like, he had, like, some real momentum in his career, especially after these movies. He was on Silicon Valley and all that. And then the pandemic hit, and it was, like, this perfect opportunity for people to just, like, stop calling him. Because, you know, stuff slowed down, projects got put on hold, and then people who are like, well, maybe we can, TJ Miller's got a big name, maybe we could, like, I don't like working with him, but maybe I can like call him up. And then they gave him the opportunity to say, you know, let's maybe find someone else. And he has just disappeared off the face of the earth because he was just such a fucking asshole to work with. Anyway, it's kind of funny because he's Wade Wilson's like one friend at the beginning of this. Anyway, I would say his story is about him forming new attachments to people, kind of opening up, getting a little bit warmer. And then when those things are in jeopardy, the lengths that he goes to try to rectify the threats to those connections to people are kind of like how his character develops. He's like, oh, okay, I I'm too ugly to face my girlfriend. I'm insecure about how I look. I'm going to go find the guy who did this to me because he said he can make it better. Right? Which is maybe not something that he would have cared about before he had a girlfriend. Right? It's not like the most insane character development ever, but it is like a character arc. Right? It's a character arc. He's kind of learning to get over some insecurities that he has. He refuses to be a superhero, but he will still do things that are a little bit heroic, right? Maybe incidentally if they fall in line with his motivations. I think the second movie is more so about that. But the first one is kind of just like... well, first of all, I would say it's primarily like it's an action comedy. And the jokes and the action are a little bit more at the forefront. And the struggles of the character are definitely there, but they're not trying to be like, this is the most incredible character journey that anyone's ever been on. He is not a terribly complicated character, but he's fairly charismatic, even if I don't think he's like funny all the time. I think the comedy in that movie, I think in all these movies, actually, it depends on the comedy. Some jokes really got me. There's some really clever ones. There's a whole like montage of him and his girlfriend having sex over like the course of a year, and they're like having sex themed to different holidays and stuff. And during every single, she goes like, "Ouch," and he like pokes his head up from under the covers, and he's got vampire teeth. And he says like "Happy Halloween," They have like, they're having like I hate food and sex stuff. It makes me so uncomfortable. If I'm eating food, I want to eat food or I want to be having sex. I don't want to be crossing those. I don't like that. I don't like it. They're like stuffing mashed potatoes into each other's mouths while they're having sex. And they're like, "Happy Thanksgiving." And then there's like a cut of them. There's a shot of them just like kind of sitting in like their living room reading and like drinking soup or something. And he goes, "Happy Lent." And that one got me. Happy Lent. That was a funny one. I think my favorite comedy in these movies is actually like the slapstick. I never heard anyone really talk about it, but I think a lot of the physical humor of Deadpool's power is some of the strongest comedic stuff in these movies for me. They really take advantage, I think especially as the films go on, they really take advantage of the fact that Deadpool can't die and you can fuck him up in whatever way you want. And it'll be like kind of painful for him, but he just kind of heals it back immediately. And so you can do kind of crazy, wacky shit. I think it's maybe at its best in Wolverine, Deadpool and Wolverine, the most recent one, because Wolverine also has that. And so they are like Looney Tunes. Like they are just fucking each other up. They're like an R-rated Looney Tunes, like Mortal Kombat Looney Tunes, where they're just fucking each other up, stabbing each other, shooting each other through the head, and just like everything's getting splattered in blood. And it's so extreme. I found myself just laughing because it was so wacky. And I think there was a real effort paid towards like the actual comedic timing and framing of those things, of those like almost visual gags. Like it's actual genuine slapstick. It's just R-rated slapstick, which is very rare to see because there's not too many ways to do it with a character. If you want to go like not at least not too as extreme as Deadpool goes, and they really do take advantage of that, and that might be one of my more favorite parts of these movies is the slapstick element. I find myself appreciating that more and more. The Deadpool and Wolverine has a great scene where the two of them just have a bloody, violent, gory fight inside of a Honda Odyssey. And it's like the craziest thing ever. And they're just ripping apart this car while they're inside of it and just absolutely trashing it. And it's really funny. Like how extreme it gets. I liked the first movie. I liked the fact that I think it starts out as like, I kind of like the jumping back and forth aspect of you kind of start in media res and then you jump back to a little bit of his backstory how he was before the experiment, him getting the cancer. You jump back again to like the current day, and then back again to kind of finish the origin by the midpoint of the film. And then from there, it's like, okay, then now we're all caught up and let's go. And for me, I think that was a pretty good solution to an otherwise kind of tired trope of like a superhero origin story. I remember people were tired of that years ago. And I think a structure like that sort of alleviates some of those problems that when you like, okay, let's give you a little action, and let's kind of intersperse that backstory with the main action of the plot so that the backstory feels less like chores that we have to get through. And I think it actually helped because the present day stuff is so comedic, and a lot of the backstory stuff is really grim, that you get some kind of, I thought, pretty compelling tone shifts. Like going from... I think the one thing you would want to avoid is having Deadpool be a character who is a complete farce. He's obviously a funny character. He's a jokester. He's a quipster. But there is like a serious side to him, and he is a real guy with real problems and internal struggles and mental shit going on. He's just also like a funny, jokey dude. And so when you have all that crazy violence and stuff, and then you get like this pretty unpleasant section of the movie of him being tortured, I think it really helps to... I think that really helps to the point of making him more I guess likable, or wanting to root for him because he's been through so much shit. And when he does get his victory at the end, it feels kind of triumphant. Like, oh wow, this guy really did overcome a lot of garbage to get here. I think it's very funny that this is clearly they make passes at the idea that this is sort of a budget film in many ways. Like, they can only get Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead, who I remember when the film came out, people were like, who is that character? And you look her up, and she's been in like 2 comics ever, which might itself just be the meta joke of the character, that she is like this so obscure that she was probably like pennies to get for licensing. And then Colossus is also, unfortunately, a C-list hero, even though I think Colossus is cool. He serves as a good foil to Wade. Tinfoil, more like. Ahaha. Up-a-dum-ba. The whole of them, like, we can't afford any bigger name X-Men is pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. I think it was that was a solid movie. I see why people were so into it when it came out, and I think, honestly, it does still hold up today. The style of humor might not be for everyone. It wasn't entirely for me, but I think there's genuinely something pretty worthwhile in that first film. And I might like the second one a little bit more, just because it kind of like doesn't have to deal with the origin story stuff. And I kind of like the direction it takes Deadpool's character a little bit more, where he has an actual real, or in my opinion, a more noticeable story arc or character arc over the course of it, of him kind of like, again, the first movie was kind of like him learning to sort of defend the connections that he'd made. The second movie is puts him in an interesting spot where now he has to actually reach out to someone. He has to reach out to this troubled kid to try and save him. I think there's a sense that he sort of sees himself in the kid as someone with kind of a troubled childhood. They never go into specific details about Wade's childhood or his upbringing. They kind of make sort of jokes about how bad it was, but you don't know how much of it is just him exaggerating, because he kind of plays this game with his girlfriend where they try to one up each other about how bad their lives are, as a little joke. So you're not sure how bad it is, but you have to imagine that anyone who ended up in his line of work might have had some like shit happen to them. And there's like a really nice moment when he's talking to that kid in that like when they first get called to respond to this situation, and he has a moment where he's not taking it super seriously, and then there's like a second where he realizes that the reason the kid is responding like that is because he's like, is there something else going on? And he basically figures out, he kind of makes an educated guess that the kid is being abused at this sort of boarding school orphanage that he's at. And his reaction is just to shoot one of the guys who runs the school on the spot, which is great. But I don't know, moments like that are like, oh, okay. It felt like a slightly more well-rounded picture of his character. I liked his interactions with Cable. I think Deadpool works well with a foil like that. Colossus kind of serves to be that, but Colossus is almost, Colossus is such a paragon type of character. Cable is a little more grittier, a little more like he doesn't want to deal with shit, and matching him up against Deadpool, I think, is a good dynamic where they can kind of, Colossus is always going to like dispense platitudes, but Cable will basically tell him to his face what he doesn't like about him. And he's kind of a little more on Deadpool's level of being a little bit more... He's not like a superhero, right? He doesn't identify himself in the same way that Colossus does. So I like that kind of dynamic that they have against each other, and the sort of weird mutual respect that they kind of gain for the other one. I like I think I do like the second one a little bit more because of that stuff. I'm a fan of character driven stuff, and I like analyzing characters and trying to kind of understand them. So I think that part of the movie appeals a little bit more to me. They got Juggernaut. Juggernaut shows up. He rips Deadpool in half, which is really funny. Oh, there's a great sequence. There's a whole great sequence with X-Force and Domino. I'm sad she didn't come back in the third movie. She was a really fun character. I like the idea of a character whose whole thing is that they're just lucky and things just sort of work out for them. There's some really cool sequences with her and things just kind of falling into place, like a good version of The Final Destination. That's what it is. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of liked all that stuff. And then Deadpool and Wolverine is kind of a difficult film to compare to the first two. Well, in some ways it's not. In some ways it is. So in the ways that it's not, again, I would say that everything that, if you liked the first two movies, everything that you like about them is still in Deadpool and Wolverine, but there's like a very new element to it that is like almost the center point of the film, like almost the message parody of the film, now that I've thought about it and read some other people's thoughts on it, which is that Deadpool and Wolverine, number one, is a send-off to the Fox Marvel movies, you know, all the old X-Men movies, even the Fantastic Four movies and stuff like that. It's kind of a send-off to those films. It is also like if you're worried, don't worry. They make lots of jokes about Disney, which is, it was pretty fun, I thought. There are lots of jokes about Disney money and stuff like that. That's very tongue-in-cheek. I thought it was funny. And then it's also like kind of a parody of... It's very meta. Not just in the sense that it's constantly... It's the most meta, honestly. Like, there'll be little fourth wall break moments in the first two films. But this one is like that, plus... There are references to, like, most of the film is spent in essentially cultural copyright dumpster. It's a dimension called the Void, where alternate versions of characters and other... They do kind of like a kind of clever thing with the multiverse idea, which is that all the Fox properties, they all exist in kind of their own timeline. And the Disney MCU stuff exists in what they call the sacred timeline, which itself is already kind of a joke. And basically, now that the premise of the movie is that because of Logan, the Wolverine film where he dies at the end, Sorry to spoil that movie. I knew about that. I haven't even seen it. He dies at the end. Wolverine is considered the anchor being of the Fox universe, which is to say, I think is kind of a meta joke about Hugh Jackman basically carried these movies and was the big reason why people were even interested in them. And now that he's gone and retired from the role, the Fox universe is basically falling apart. The interest in it is dropping. And in the movie, this manifests as the timeline is literally deteriorating, and it's going to stop existing in like a few thousand years. And the main, I don't know if he's, I guess one of the main villains is a guy who works for like the Time Police. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to fucking sit and watch your universe. I don't want to spend the rest of my life watching your universe disintegrate slowly, because I'm not even going to see it actually happen. So I built the machine, and in like 36 hours, it's going to be operational, and we're just going to fast track this shit. So we're going to send you off to the Marvel universe. It is literally Deadpool is trying to send himself to the Marvel unit. They're trying to send Deadpool to the Marvel universe in the MCU, and he doesn't want to. He wants to save his timeline. Like that's the meta joke. And in order to do that, we have to get Hugh Jackman back as Wolverine. So it's not, I know a lot of people like that Logan movie. It sounds good. I'm sure it's great. And there is a concern with like, I know that movie gave him like a great send off and all that. And there's a concern about bringing him back and it being kind of like, it would kind of ruin that film. The compromise that they make is Hugh Jackman is back as Wolverine, but it's not the same Wolverine. It is in many ways a very different character from a different universe and a different timeline. And so the sanctity of the Logan film and the capstone to that character is preserved. It's all of that still matters, and it still has emotional weight. And this is kind of a different Wolverine's arc that you're seeing now, just played by the same actor. And hey, Hugh Jackman is great as Wolverine. I don't care that much. This is a very referential movie. If you have not, like, honestly, I forgot. Like, dude, I forgot that Chris Evans played the Human Torch in, like, the 2000s Fantastic Four movies. He shows up in this. I forgot that was him. I was like, what? What is this? And then it took me, like, another hour before I remembered, oh, shit. He was in that movie. What? Because I was like, oh, why is he not Captain America? Like, I really forgot about that. I guess this is kind of spoilers. We're going to go into spoiler territory. Skip to probably the last thing I'm going to talk about, but whatever. There are a lot of cameos. Some of them are really fun. You get Wesley Snipes' Blade. He makes a joke about how he's going to be the only Blade ever forever. And the other characters look at the camera because they are actively shooting a new Blade film with a different Blade. Fucking Jennifer Garner Elektra shows up from the Daredevil movies. I guess they couldn't get whoever the fuck, I forget who played Daredevil in those movies. They couldn't get him, but they got Jennifer Garner Elektra, which is almost better because she had her own terrible spin-off film from that. Okay, this is where I feel like the kind of make or break is for people. Like, this is kind of emblematic of that. It is Channing Tatum as Gambit. This is the first on-screen depiction of Gambit in a live action film. And I didn't know this until okay. Kat and I were talking about some random shit on the way to the theater, and she brought up how they were always trying to do a Gambit movie with Channing Tatum. And I was like, what? I never heard of that. I think I remember there being talks about a Gambit movie and like a logo, and it just never happened. I didn't know Channing Tatum was being eyed for the role, but he shows up as Gambit as a reference to a movie that has never been made. And they make jokes about how that movie has never been made. And like, if we had not had that conversation randomly a few hours before going to the theater, or, before the movie started, I would have had no context for that. It would have been completely lost on me. So the fact that the movie is so referential is in some ways a strength and in some ways a weakness. It's a double-edged sword. If you are in on it and you've been following this shit, there are probably some pretty good jabs and stuff and some jokes, and you might pog out a little for the references. But if you aren't, you might be lost for a good chunk of the film. That's like maybe the biggest weakness I saw in it. It wasn't a huge problem for me because I do at least follow some of this stuff enough to know kind of what they're referencing, but it's not all of it like completely landed for me in terms of like, what is that? Okay. And some of the characters I was like, were you in a movie or not? I have no clue. Were you like a speculative thing? Were you like, I don't know. Some people compared this to the Ezra Miller Flash movie and saying it's just as bad in that aspect. I would disagree. I think the biggest difference is that in the Flash, you're watching a known child kidnapper and violent, horrible freak, Ezra Miller, doing all of that, and you're supposed to care about them and their character, and it is impossible, and also it's a really bad performance. And in this movie, it's a character that I actually like, and another character I actually like, and they're being portrayed well, and the jokes are better, and the slapstick is better, and the references are to good movies, and they aren't dredging up the CGI corpses of actors who literally drank themselves to death over the roles that they are being shown in. So there is a bit of a different vibe to Deadpool and Wolverine. I would say that it is a lot more loving in its parody. There is a kind of cheesy, but kind of nice, like it's kind of sweet end credits montage, basically just reviewing basically the history of the Fox universe, to say that this movie is the final send off to the Fox movies. And all the good times and bad times and the acting and all the actors and their experiences and stuff. There's a lot of behind the scenes footage and interviews, and it's kind of sweet. It's sweet seeing a much younger Hugh Jackman in an interview talking about how he was really nervous and he didn't know if he was going to be able to pull off the Wolverine character, and now he's just the de facto beloved face of that character, so much so that he literally ended the character's storyline and died, and then was like, I'll come back because I like doing it and people love it so much, I'll come back for another one. It's nice, okay? I won't lie. It's nice. It got me a little. I like those old X-Men movies. I think I've only seen the first two. That's probably all the ones you need to see. Yeah, I would say Deadpool and Wolverine. Again, a very consistent trilogy of movies, I have to say. If you don't like the first one, you will not like the other two. If you like the first one, you will probably also like the other two. If you only like the first one for its novelty, they will have a diminishing quality, like a drop off in quality, because it's just consistent. But if not, then I think they'll work for you. I had a good time at Deadpool and Wolverine. I laughed. There was a lot of Madonna music. The whole film is kind of built around the song Like a Prayer by Madonna, which is interesting. Apparently, it was really difficult for them to get the rights to that, and they had to Ryan Reynolds had to personally really pitch it to Madonna, and she ended up being really into it by the end. The other thing is about the Deadpool movies is that Ryan Reynolds really wants to make them, and I think you can kind of feel that. There is a certain amount of love and love for the character in his portrayal of Deadpool and his writing, because I think he's a writer on all three of them. I remember he wanted to make the first one so badly that I don't think this was ever confirmed, but okay, so you know that opening action scene on the highway and all that, right? That was initially the test scene that they made. He basically got some funds together to make a test scene to pitch to the studio, and I don't think that they were super receptive to it at first, but then he leaked it online, and it popped off, and people were like really excited for the idea of that movie being made. And then that ended up resulting in Deadpool being greenlit, and then that whole thing was eventually reshot and worked into like, the first movie. But I feel like even the parts of the Deadpool character in the movies that I'm not like, I feel like the swearing is like, it gets a little cringy for me sometimes. I at least feel like Ryan Reynolds thinks it's funny. And that makes it like easier to swallow for me. It makes it feel like there's some kind of earnestness. I would say the Deadpool films, the Deadpool, those movies, they're like the film equivalent of the Sonic Adventure soundtrack. Like, this isn't a perfect analogy. Roll with me on this one. You listen to Crush 40, and it is such cheesy, corny butt rock music that's so over the top and dramatic, but god damn it, they fucking care about it. They are making that music because they want to make it. They think it's awesome. They think it's badass. And that's what separates them from like a Nickelback, Nickelback's How You Remind Me was literally written because Chad Kroeger, the restaurant, the grocery store outlet, Chad Kroeger, or are they just distribution? I don't know. Spent like a whole, like 2 years or something analyzing every single top 40 song and breaking them down by like themes of the lyrics, when do the vocals start, when did they have instrumental pauses, what kinds of instruments are used, what chords did they use, what intensities happen, and what is like the emotional arc of the song, and basically genetically engineered the song How You Remind Me to be a perfect top 40 radio hit, a number one hit in the year it released, like 2004 or something. And it completely worked. That song was made in a lab to be successful, right? And I think when people dislike Nickelback, one of the things they're responding to is how manipulated and corporate they feel. Like there's kind of an inauthenticity to their sound of like they just sound like that because that's what's popular, and they just hit mainstream popularity. But you listen to Crush 40, and Crush 40 is like, what if you just were really into that sound and you just did, but I will never let you go, and you made that your career. And there's and it goes from something that's like cringe to something that is like lovable and endearing and that you can actually get into. And for me personally, I can enjoy, and I will like listening to Crush 40 music every now and again because I think it's actually like fun, and it turns the corner from being cheesy to kind of like awesome in a way that I can appreciate it. That's how the Deadpool movies feel like to me a little bit. Not like they're like shitty or accidentally good or anything like that, but just there's like an earnestness to them so that even in the parts that I'm not as much into, I can still say, hey, this is the movie that he really wanted to make. I'm sure there's like, studio mandates and stuff like that, and concessions that they had to make. But I wouldn't be surprised if like Ryan Reynolds, who's also like a producer on these movies, is like very proud of them. And I think that's kind of nice. I think that's neat that you can have a project like that over such a long period of time in Hollywood, in superhero movies, the most oversaturated genre of the last 10, 15 years. So overall, I would give the Deadpool movies and Deadpool and Wolverine a thumbs up. I think that's basically all I had to say about it.